I'm Clarence Wigfall at AdvancedScienceCommunications.com. How do you use the multitude of data and data formats that are flooding into medical use? We teleconference with Daniel Crichton about the questions that have to be answered to make meaningful use of complex medical data work. Dan Crichton is a principal computer scientist, program manager, and principal investigator at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL. He oversees programs in Earth and planetary data systems and serves as JPL's thrust lead in the area of data systems for climate research. We asked Dan about some of the questions that have to be asked and answered to make the deluge of medical data now flowing in actually work. Here are a few excerpts, but here's his first answer about major considerations that we have to take into account.
There's an information explosion. There's in a number of fields, not just in science, but in many different industries. And I think what is occurring now is we've understood how to capture all this data. And so you've got several different instruments that are all observing and acquiring information. How do you pull that information together and actually integrate it? And how do you be able to actually deliver something to the community that can actually be used? I think there's a lot of questions about similar things on the medical science side. What can be used to build a national network? What kinds of data questions could be answered? We're seeing value of sharing data.
We asked Dan, why is it important to store this data in a format and in ways that can be accessed far into the future, when we don't really even know what kind of computer systems we'll have or even exactly what use we'll have for the data? This is what he had to say.
If you look at a lot of the data we acquired, sometimes we don't know the value of it until years later. And so we may not see a case for a couple of years of a certain type of patient that had a certain diagnosis, certain symptoms, and a certain outcome. But that may have value to us in opening our understanding if we have another patient with some similarities. And so I think capturing that and building as much variation of the data has immense value if we can take it and actually use it to improve our decisions.
Dan had a lot to say about system architecture and why it is so important. Here's part of what he had to say.
I think 10 years ago, both in planetary science and in medicine, we were looking at what does the next decade look like. We don't know what kinds of science capabilities will be required in 10 years. We don't know what questions will be answered. And so we have to architect our systems to support that. A lot of I think practitioners are looking at all kinds of different instruments, all kinds of different applications. And if we can look at ways that we can really improve how that data is integrated, how that data is presented, and how decisions are made from looking at it, I think you've got a paradigm shift for medicine coming.
A big question that we had was, why was JPL involved in medical research? Dan had a very interesting answer to that question.
The earlier we can get in with a program, the better, because we really can help engineer how data is being acquired all the way to how it's being analyzed. And we want to build that kind of a pipeline, that kind of a infrastructure, that kind of capability in place. We've got to be able to design it in such a way for change. We know change is going to happen. The kinds of technologies, the kinds of instruments we can build now far differ from what we could have done 20 years ago. And so we really have an opportunity now to, I think, to leverage and use that data, but we've got to be able to have the infrastructure to support it. And so getting involved has really been important. And I think, as Dr. Wetzel probably has pointed out to you, that really I think the value of JPL being involved is that we can take our experience over in Earth and planetary science, and there's just a tremendous amount of leveraging we can do to reapply a lot of the lessons learned there, a lot of the software technologies, a lot of the capabilities, and really grow the community on the medical side.
With so many types of devices being used, different universities, hospitals being involved, different kinds of hardware, we asked Dan, what are some of the challenges in trying to bring all of these elements together?
The challenge we tend to have on the physical sciences side is really you've got several different instruments that are all observing and acquiring information. How do you pull that information together and actually integrate it? And how do you be able to actually deliver something to the community that can actually be used? And the challenge is that data is acquired in different platforms. The data is processed often at different universities. We've got a need to figure out how to actually use this data for years and years and years. There's also cultural challenges. A lot of the different organizations have to come together and work together. And so some of the challenges we've had, aside from how do you get data sharing, how do we lay down sort of an internet, if you will, for medicine, or internet for cancer, or internet for space, how do we get these groups to actually work together? And so we deal with a lot of issues related to security, a lot of issues related to capturing data in common formats, a lot of issues related to just being able to present the data as a virtual distributed system that looks integrated. And so we spend a lot of time with groups just working through those cultural issues and working with groups to look at how can they change some of their practices to better work as a more of a national type system.
Dan also spoke about who's interested, who has to be involved in order to make this meaningful use of medical data a nationally viable program. Here are a few excerpts from what he had to say about that.
Maybe 10 or 20 years ago, we had big challenges in computing power and in computing needs. Now I think our challenge is really is in the area of how do we make use and understand a lot of this data. And I know it's the topic of several different groups, certainly the National Science Foundation, the National Academy, and so forth are really interested in this question and looking at where, over the next decade, how do we as a country and how do we look at emerging technologies and how we can really make meaningful use of this data and understand it and analyze it.
We'll close this segment with Dan Crichton of JPL with a few comments by him about how he feels about working with Children's Hospital Los Angeles and helping them with their quest to improve patient care for children and babies.
Certainly we know that there's a number of initiatives in Europe and other places that are looking at these virtual networks and things like that. I think what VPICU is doing is sort of leading the charge, and certainly in pediatrics. And so I think we're happy to work with Children's Hospital in this endeavor and to look at how much we can leverage from what we're doing at JPL.